Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Caregiving Gen X Style. I'm Steve Mullen.
And I'm Jennifer Mullen.
There are a number of types of dementia. We've talked about a few of them, and they're all heartbreaking. But one of the hardest to watch unfold is Lewy Body Dementia, or LBD. In this episode, we're going to talk with a woman who has written a book about her experience caring for her mother who had LBD. But first, Jennifer, how's your mom?
Goggy's doing great. If you listened to the last episode, you know that we were recording that on her actual 85th birthday. So that was lovely. Of course, we'd had some wintry weather that day, and it was a very brief celebration. And then just a few days after that, both of our kids were home. My brother, who lives locally, and my brother-in-law were here along with Goggy, and we had a lovely celebration. The joke about that celebration, by the way, is that she requested my famous roast chicken for her meal. The funny thing is I've literally never cooked a roast chicken in my entire life. Turkey, yes. A roast chicken, no. But I figured it out. It turned out really well, I think.
It turned out very well. We got some advice from a guy at a bar.
We did actually.
We actually did.
But it turned out very well. So she was very happy with her roast chicken and the amazing scallop potatoes that my brother made.
Oh, those were amazing.
So yeah, she's doing great. We had a great celebration. I do want to make a quick mention before we turn over to talking about your mom, Steve, and that is that I'm very excited to welcome a mascot to Caregiving Gen X Style, in the form of a small stuffed squirrel. Stay tuned, listeners. You will see a photo of this on our Facebook page. And if you've been listening for any length of time, you know that we often have quote unquote squirrel moments where we get a little bit off track and we sort of chase the squirrel down the path for a few minutes and then we get ourselves back on track. But we had the delightful surprise in the mail this week of a small stuffed squirrel showing up in an Amazon package. It was super fun. We really had no idea who it came from because there was no message inside. But then I had a light bulb moment realizing that most likely it came from my most favorite listener, also known as my very best friend in the whole world, who has a great sense of humor and has been listening to binging the podcast recently, really, and decided to send us a little squirrel. So he or she, we have not decided yet, is sitting on the table here with us, and we're discussing whether or not we might have a little squirrel naming contest. We got to decide, boy, girl, what's the name? I don't know. We'll figure it out. But he or she is really pretty cute.
We'll post something on Facebook about it, so look for that.
Really excited to have an official mascot. So moving on, Steve, how is your mom?
My mom is doing fine. They got past the whole lockdown thing I talked about in the last episode with the norovirus, but you may recall a few episodes ago I talked about how they put a smart thermostat into her room.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And I said at the time that this may end up causing a lot of problems.
But at least it's not connected to ours, which is good. Not like the lights are.
No, but and it hasn't caused a lot of problems. It's just a reminder that she actually does have a touch of dementia.
Yes.
If you talk to her, you'd never know it, but there's certain little things that she just can't seem to wrap her mind around, and the thermostat is one of them. I think it's also that when she lived independently, she had a thermostat that she literally never touched. It was just set for her, and it worked, and there was no big deal. And I've been told by my brother that our thermostat growing up, no one was allowed to touch it but my father.
Right.
So that might be the other thing, but she just can't wrap her head around how this thing works.
Yeah.
It's not that difficult, really. So it's a Google Nest thermostat. It's got a big number, which is what the thermostat is set to. And then it's got a little number, which is the actual temperature in the room. Not that complicated to remember, but she cannot get that right. And, you know, the big number will say 71 and the heat's on, and then the little number will say 72. And she's like, why is it not running? I said, because it's 72. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, I think I had that backwards, but you know what I mean. She can't quite get it right.
Okay, fair.
Okay, I get it.
See, you even got it backwards.
Anyway,
she's almost 85.
Almost every time I go over there, it ends up being a discussion about how this thermostat works.
Right. Well, and I know you talked about talking to the lovely maintenance folks there, right? Because they are about ready to install these things in all of these people's apartments,
well, yeah,
right?
The thing
that
about,
might not be a great idea.
The thing about that is that what I forgot, and I remember hearing this back when these things started coming out, is they do start to learn your patterns. And it did.
Okay.
Every day before going up to dinner at 4:30, she would turn the thermostat up a little bit so it will be warmer when she got back. And it started to learn that. But it also was picking up other things throughout the day when she just randomly tinkered with the thermostat. And so it was up and down, up and down, up and down all day. And I figured out how it works, and I was able to adjust them to where she actually wanted them. So she really shouldn't have to touch it much. But not everyone's going to have a family member that can do that.
Right.
So, yeah, I may recommend against doing this for the rest of the 70 or 80 rooms in this place.
Be prepared that they're going to get more calls from the maintenance folks asking what the heck is going on with the temperature in their apartment.
For the people who don't have family members that can connect their smartphones to it, he may end up having to do it himself, and then he's going to have like 80 different smart thermostats on his phone, which just seems like a nightmare.
Wise. Yeah.
It seems like a total nightmare. Whew. But anyway, stay tuned for more about the thermostat.
I feel like it's going to be an adventure.
Probably.
Yeah.
So getting into our episode, the exact cause of Lewy body dementia is unknown. We just don't know what causes it. But what is known is that it is a progressive dementia that can lead to forgetfulness, hallucinations, and paranoia. And it also shares some similar physical symptoms to Parkinson's disease.
So our guest for this episode has a lot of experience with LBD. Her mother fought it for several years before passing away in 2023. So Michelle Cain is the author of the book, Did My Mom Drop Acid?
Now, which is a great title.
Right. I mean, if that does not grab your attention. The book is really a touching and frankly an amusing look at caregiving for LBD and all the things that come with it. And the amusing part, I put a little bit of an emphasis on that, right? Because we have talked about the fact, if you do not laugh, sometimes you will cry. So
all the time.
Definitely appreciated the humor that was woven in throughout.
So, Michelle, welcome to Caregiving Gen X Style.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So first off, tell us about your mom.
So my mom, well, the book is written in humorous because my mom was really funny. So she had
love that.
Yeah, she had a great sense of humor. And I often would think that she would have laughed at some of this stuff too. And my mom was a spitfire. She was someone that you wouldn't want to cross the wrong way, but could also just show up in a very loving way. She was all things. She was very colorful.
You could definitely, that definitely comes through in the book for sure.
It absolutely did. So one of the things we did love, we sort of mentioned this already, is that you did inject a lot of humor throughout this book. Is that a conscious thing or is it just how your family is?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So I think personally, I just find the absurdity of everyday life hysterical sometimes, and if you don't laugh, you really will cry. And especially with Lewy bodies, because the hallucinations can be so funny that I just found myself, if I wasn't laughing, I would be strung out a little bit about like trying to argue with her about the hallucination. So I found that using humor really was a tool for me with her disease. But also, that's how I live my life. If I'm not laughing at things, then it's not a good place to be. And so I think to some degree, I have to be honest, use it a little bit as a defense, because whereas with Lewy body dementia, I knew going in that, this was a progressive disease that would end in her dying. And so that was something that I needed a levity to, if that makes sense. And so I used humor for that. And then when I went to write the book, I really wanted to give it a humorous tone and then also have some of the raw emotion with it as well.
Absolutely. And, longtime listeners of this podcast will know that my mother went through, I want to say 3, maybe almost 4 months of COVID delirium, which really, really acted just like this kind of dementia. She was having hallucinations and they weren't really funny to her. I did try to make light of them even with her. She had a common hallucination or a false memory that she had a limo driver or some kind of chauffeur named George. And it was always George. It was always the same guy. And she'd say, "Oh, I'll just get George to take me." I'm like, "Mom, there is no George." And I bring him up occasionally with her even now, and she sort of remembers it. Thank goodness that fog just lifted on her and it just suddenly went away. But I know exactly where you're coming from, where seriously you have to kind of make light of this stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, Steve and I definitely have said that throughout the entirety of this podcast. I mean, we have a lot of moments where we're laughing about some things that, maybe aren't funny in the most traditional sense, but this is how we've been getting through all of this. And so clearly, Michelle, when reading your book, that's what you used. I love that you said defense mechanism, because I do think that's it to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you guys were talking about the thermostat, earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of giggling because I remember my mom with the remote, and so the humor was already coming up because my immediate reaction to that was, oh no.
Yep. Listen, Michelle, you have to go back if you've not listened. We did a whole episode about technology, our elderly loved ones and technology.
We had a lot of fun with that one.
So yeah, you know.
Oh yeah, my whole body tensed when you said, the Nest. I was like, oh no.
Yep. It's a real thing, and of course, it's so frustrating. Like when you're in the middle of it. My mom's famous saying. Speaking of squirrel moments, I'm gonna have a squirrel moment. Her famous saying with like her iPhone or her iPad, which by the way, is amazing. She's 85. She's using all these things pretty well, but she'll say, if something isn't working properly, my phone is flipping. It's flipping. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. Okay, sure. Whatever you say. So we laugh about that often. Okay, but let's we have to talk about some serious things.
Gotta rein it in.
Yep, we're going to rein it in a little bit. So, Michelle, you first really noticed your mother's symptoms right about the time when the world was shutting down due to COVID-19. So what was it that really clued you in that something was going on?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because it was so confusing trying to differentiate. Was she just lonely from lockdown, or, sometimes with elderly, you can have something like a bladder infection or anything that can cause some delusional behavior. So it was very confusing at the beginning, and she would talk about things that had levels of truth to them. So like seeing her dog that had passed away, Portia. My mom was kind of a little bit obsessed with Portia would be the perfect way to say that. And so it wasn't unusual for her to talk about this dog, but the way she was talking about the dog, it was like it was standing in front of her. And so that was one of the first red flags, was like, that's a little odd, right? And then we're in the middle of lockdown, and she's talking about these people all being at her house that were people I knew. So again, level of truth to it. But then you start asking, like, is she entertaining during the pandemic? And I knew that wasn't true because my mother she could be social, but she also, during that time, she liked to isolate. And so I knew that was a red flag as well. And then when I got the voicemail that was so strange, talking about my sister and I not eating and being in her guest front bedroom, and I'm on the phone with her while she's saying this. And so it's, there were too many things that were just not adding up. And so it set me to thinking, this is not old age. This is not pandemic isolation. Something's going on. And even with that, it still was a lot of back and forth confusion.
Yeah. And I really feel for you when you tell that story, just because when I think back to the beginning of the pandemic and all this talk about how it was so important to stay connected with one another, right? Just as humans, to stay connected with one another, but especially, the elderly folks in your life. And, certainly Steve and I and others in our family made a very concerted effort. I mean, in the very, very beginning, when literally like we didn't see my mom for a little while, we had her on FaceTime on the iPad on the dining room table so that we could, essentially keep an eye on her and make sure that she didn't get so isolated that she fell into some kind of delusion. So I can only imagine what that was like for you to try to discern and figure out kind of what was what. I mean, it's kind of amazing that her symptoms really started at that specific moment in time. I know. And I think the biggest clue was my mother was somebody who, you had to force her to go to the doctor. It was like a thing to get her to the doctor. And she actually called me one day and said, I think I need to go to the doctor. And that was a huge red flag for me. And did she, just curiously, she said she needed to go to the doctor because she was recognizing that she was having hallucinations of some sort?
She knew something was up. Like now it took her a minute to tell me this on the phone. We would go back and forth and she would say, well, something's just not right. And then I finally got out of her. She said, well, I'm seeing things, and it was kind of funny because the way she said it was so casual, like everyone sees things.
Right.
And I thought, oh, if she's actually bringing this forward, then she really is seeing stuff. And so that's when we finally decided, hey, we need to actually get expert opinion on this, not just us trying to decipher what this is.
Right. And I remember when my mom was going through her COVID delirium, which, I mean, like I said, when I read this book, there were so many similarities, and thankfully ours was only short term. But, how I combated it was basically she'd come up with some wacky thing that she'd seen, and I'd say, no, Mom, that was a dream. Don't worry about it. It was just a dream.
Yeah.
But then, occasionally after this had been going on for a while, she'd say, well, such and such happened. Was that a dream or was that real? And I'd say that was a dream. And she said, okay.
Yeah. And I do remember my mom checking her reality with me, and she didn't always believe me. That was the hard part. But she would say to me, as this progressed, her delusions and hallucinations became very vivid, and then went from people that I would know to what I refer to as the ladies in the house or the attic people. When you were talking about George, the limo driver, our George was the attic people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I remember that part of the book.
Yeah, they kind of followed us through many things. But she would start checking with me, like, do you see them? And I would say no. And it's like I could recognize her face change. Like she wasn't sure if she believed me because she really did see them.
Did she? I'm curious to know, especially since it sounds like she had some awareness of some of these hallucinations. Mm-hmm. Did it scare her at any point?
That's a really good question, because it didn't at first. She was more frustrated by it. I wouldn't say scared. Where it changed was when the paranoia went with it, and she thought her neighbor's son was trying to take her house.
Right.
Yeah. And then she actually would see the neighbor's son in her house, and she would start calling me at 3 and 4 in the morning. And she was genuinely scared. You could hear the fear in her voice. And the silver lining to that was it made it very easy for me to make the decision that, 1, you can't live on your own. And 2, I had more cooperation from her, willingness to go live somewhere else. Because she would have been one of those people I would have had to have drugged kicking and screaming to assisted living or memory care, but she was scared. And the hallucinations for the most part were fairly benign, but we did have a couple that were truly scary. And those are really hard on the caregiving side because you can't solve them for the person, and you want to.
Right. So another thing you noticed pretty quickly, though, is that your relationship shifted from being the daughter to being the parent of your parent. And we have talked about this so many times in this show. How did you handle it?
I did not handle it well. I look back.
We'll all be honest.
Yeah.
There was a couple of things. One, the pandemic was going on. I am the sandwich generation. So I had 2 boys. One was in high school and one was just getting ready to start a grad program. And I guess when I imagined myself, being a caretaker, it was like, I'd be in my 60s, the boys would be grown. And so I was very resentful when those roles flipped, because it put me in this position of having another responsibility, because it was like having another child. And I didn't handle it well because I didn't look at it as, let me help you. I looked at it as, I don't have the time, and this is like a burden, and that wasn't a fair way to look at it. It also, for me personally, and this goes into kind of being a reluctant caretaker, my mother and I did not have a perfect relationship. And so it stirred up a lot of our past issues almost immediately, and forced me to deal with them with somebody who was unable to participate in the resolution of them. So it was really challenging and very complicated emotions that went with it.
I really appreciate you saying that, because we've had some feedback and some discussion over the couple of years that Steve and I have been doing this podcast. Steve and I come at this caregiving with our moms from some slightly different, I think, upbringings, but more or less, right? We're here. Our moms took care of us. It's now time for us to take care of them. And we didn't have maybe the full breadth of those complicated emotions. But I remember hearing very early on from one of my friends who was listening, who also did not have a great relationship with her mom. And I think she was struggling a little bit, trying to figure, and she was at that point in the throes of helping, her dad was still around, but helping her dad with her mom, and, feeling resentful. Like, you were not very nice to me when I was growing up at all. You did not treat me well. And now here I am, in this position where I, feel like I need to help take care of you. So I appreciate you being honest about that, because I do think that is a piece of this that probably is not talked about enough, frankly.
Yeah. And I'm glad that I got a chance to put a voice to it, because the feedback I've gotten from people is exactly what you were saying with your friend, that, you feel so much guilt about having those feelings, but they're just very human feelings when the relationship is a complicated one.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, back to when you're suddenly feeling like you're the parent of your parent, I will say, I think one of the things that I have struggled with is finding that balance of trying to figure out what the things are that my mom might really need help with, but also like not taking her independence away from her. And I find myself, like I talk to myself a lot in my head about that when I'm over helping her with something. I suspect my brother does the same thing too, because yes, she needs a lot of help. Her mobility has declined, and we're doing everything we can to keep her living independently as long as possible. But like, there are certain things we don't want her to do because we want her to be safe, right? In her apartment.
I don't want to have to go pick her up again.
Right. Steve doesn't want to have to go pick her up because she slipped to the floor. But also like the whole dignity thing, that's a really hard thing to do. So Michelle, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that when you were caring for your mom.
It is a really hard thing. It's like watching someone lose the things that make us human, over time and slowly. And it really comes down to dignity. I think for me, I struggled with originally wanting her to be the person I knew. And so I almost involved her in things like she could make decisions that she wasn't capable of making. So at the beginning, it was almost the opposite. And then as we went through it more, I did find myself, you're always, like you said, balancing safety. But it's, I wanted to give her that ability, because she was such an independent woman, to make decisions that she could, or have that little bit of autonomy that I could give her sometimes. And sometimes it looks like you're sitting across the table and you don't help them with their food, and that's horrible when you're on the other side, because I would sit there and be like, I could just cut that for you really fast.
Yep.
But I knew by reaching over the table and doing that would be really hard on her. So it was sometimes just those little acts where, like, I'm going to watch you struggle a little bit, but this isn't a safety concern. And so I'm going to let you go ahead and do this because that's going to be important to you as a human being. Yeah,
that's actually a really good example, Michelle, because that's definitely something I have been guilty of with my mom. And again, so she has severe rheumatoid arthritis, and so her mobility is very limited. What I learned, but it was a learned skill when I'm with her, is to watch, let her do it, use the fork and the knife and cut. And if I recognize that she's starting to get a tiny bit frustrated and is having difficulty doing it, I will say, may I help you with that? And usually she'll say yes, but I did have to stop myself. I mean, I have such a vivid, picture in my head. I had to stop myself from just grabbing the fork and knife and saying, here, just let me do that for you.
And I've run into the same problem. My mother's in a wheelchair, and we'll be doing stuff around her apartment, and we'll go into the bedroom, and I'll be, she'll be having me fix something or get something or whatever. And then I turn around and walk out of the bedroom to the living room, and she gets stuck. And I've gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, she's going to let me know if she's so stuck that she can't get out of there. And she rarely is, but most of the time it's just me being impatient. Let's go. Okay, come on, let's go to the next thing.
Right. I relate to that a lot. My mom would constantly get stuck with her wheelchair in the bathroom. Because it's a small area, and turning around, and I'd find myself kind of in the doorway like, we need help.
Right. Yes. Well, I mean, again, I just so appreciate this conversation because, yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like all three of us have had a lot of these very similar, experiences, and dignity is definitely the word that, keeps coming to mind. You want to continue to allow them to have their dignity as much as possible. Of course, squirrel moment. And I think we've talked about this. My mom, I don't know that she cares so much about dignity anymore.
She has so little dignity left.
Yeah, you walk in the apartment, like if it's my turn to go over and help her take a shower and she knows I'm on the way, like she's just stark naked by the time I walk in the door. She totally is. And my brother and I had a whole conversation about this, about how we time our text to her to let her know that we're coming over so that she's not totally stark naked when we walk in the front door. So, yes.
But the flip side of that is my mother, who will not leave the apartment unless she has, her matching necklace with her vest and her brooch and matching watch. Yeah. I mean, she's got to be fully done up before she leaves the apartment. My mom does not care about that anymore. Nope. Not at all.
I have to say that brings me a little joy listening to your mom with that. Like, that would be something my sister and I would do. We'd be timing our text,
Oh, there is a lot. There's a lot of back and forth with my one brother who lives here locally. I mean, there's a lot of, and Gagi listens to these. Gagi, we love you so much. We love you so much, Gagi.
She does listen to the podcast.
But just in case you didn't already know this, sometimes your son and I are strategizing via text before we ever set foot in your apartment. It's necessary sometimes. Okay, so let's move on to, something in the book that really, hit us in the gut was when your mother told you over the phone that you should go back to your own life and let her live hers. So how did it feel to be the caregiver for someone who, at least in that moment, was kind of saying that she didn't want the help?
Oh, man, I actually remember that day. I remember where I was because it hit me in the gut too. And I'll be honest, for two reasons. One is it hit me in the gut because part of me wanted to say, okay, I'll go back to my life.
Right. Yep.
And then two, the other part was what we were talking about. I know she didn't want the help. She didn't want me to have to help her. And so it made me sad for her because I knew that was also hard on her. But it wasn't, it was frustrating also because she had no reality of how much help she needed in her world. And I don't know if this is indicative of just Lewy body dementia or other dementias. She didn't see her illness. So it wasn't until the physical, where she started degrading there, that she would actually acknowledge it. But before, I mean, she could be talking to you about a delusion or a hallucination one minute and then turn around and be telling you that she doesn't need help, So it was so not based in reality that it got to be very frustrating having those conversations with her because she would tell, she meant it. She didn't need the help.
And so when you say like she didn't see what was happening, you mean like literally because her physical body was not breaking down. Mm-hmm. She just was not, it wasn't like suddenly, oh, I need a cane to walk because I'm unsteady on my feet. That is not what this is really.
No, it wasn't until Lewy body has a Parkinsonian type side to it with a movement disorder. And so when that's always present, but for my mom, it was not the pronounced part of it until the end. And so when that settled in, then she was very much aware of her disease. But at that time also, she pretty much lived in a hallucinatory world. So it was different. At the beginning, you could sit with her at a doctor's office and they could tell her, here's what you have based on the tests we've done. And she would acknowledge that. We'd walk out into the elevator. She'd want to go to lunch and it was like it didn't even happen. She was fine.
Wow.
So, yeah. So it was very frustrating.
But it's interesting though. I'm thinking back on a guest that we had on, several episodes ago talking about Alzheimer's, and he was saying when he was caring for I think it was his mom, right?
His mother, yeah.
He was caring for his mom. And I thought this was really interesting. He realized he was trying to find the bright side in all of it, right? As best you can in situations like this. And he realized that he could really talk to his mom only about like good, positive things, right? And maybe the negative things wouldn't really so much stick with her, and he could kind of like almost direct the conversation or put like the happy thoughts in her head. Can you do that? Again, I realize like Alzheimer's, dementia, Lewy body dementia, like they're all like kind of related. But I'm wondering, based on like what you just said, did you have those opportunities where you could just try to sort of frame and create the positive atmosphere as much as possible?
For sure. And while you were talking, I was remembering back because my mom did that too. In fact, she would say to us at times, I only want to focus on the positive. And I'd actually think, well, that leads me to believe she kind of knows a little bit that something's going on, right? But you could, to a degree, especially where I found that was with the hallucinations, if they didn't have the paranoia with them, because sometimes they didn't. The paranoia came on and would come on and go and leave. It was like it fluctuated. If the paranoia was not with the hallucination, then you could steer a lot of things towards humorous or positive. An example is when she was staying with her sister in College Station, she was convinced the neighbors across the street were filling cannons and loading ammo behind a concrete wall.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember, I'm like, wow, Mom, well, they're going to be well prepared. And then she just started laughing,
Right.
So you could kind of get her off of things with some positive or humor, and then kind of something that could have gone very negative didn't for those reasons.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of that, though, so Michelle, don't shortchange yourself and your sister, I'm sure, too. But, right, like a lot of it is how we as caregivers react in these situations. And I think Steve and I would fully acknowledge that we have a lot of situations, initially we might not react to the best way.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. But then maybe you have some time to step back and think about it and think, you know what, if this happens again, if this conversation happens again, I'm going to handle it differently. I'm going to steer it this way. I'm going to say something a little bit, different to make it less of a frustrating for me and subsequently a completely negative, conversation. Right?
Speaking of which, looking back at your caregiving journey, is there anything you would have done differently?
At the beginning, I argued with her a lot about the hallucinations, and I feel that is because I just wanted her to be the person I knew. So I was having trouble acknowledging the disease at the beginning, right? I think you always want your person to look and act like they had in the past. I wanted her to understand that wasn't reality, which was just not a winning battle. And so I would have come around faster on that because once I jumped on board and just started engaging in the hallucinations instead of fighting them, our relationship got better. The disease was easier to handle. We could have humor around it. And it really was something that she couldn't control. Her brain was telling her she was seeing those things. So once I could step back and look at it more objectively instead of with the emotion of a daughter, then I could handle it better. And so I really wish, when I look back, it's probably the advice I give a lot of people, especially with Lewy body, like just go with the hallucinations because otherwise you'll leave frustrated and it will frustrate the other person too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you on that. Not obviously my mom doesn't have LBD, but yeah, I think about certain situations and the way I've handled them. And as the journey has gone on, very blessed that my mom is 85 years old and at least, spirit wise, she's still awesome and still there. But, there are some times where probably she's had a few moments of being slightly confused, for a moment. And I've wanted to push back. And I think my brother has too, and sort of correct. And I have really tried to learn. And so I appreciate you saying that, Michelle, because I need to continue to say to myself, right, like sometimes it's not worth it. Like what is the point? What's the ultimate objective? And I think you hit it on the nail on the head. The ultimate objective is just to continue to enjoy your relationship for as long as you can. It's the most important part.
Oh, I agree. And I think it's funny. It's a pick your battles, right?
Yes.
It's, I think there's so many battles that I picked, especially actually early. And then an example of one late for people is if you're familiar with memory care, it's a lack of a better way of saying, it's like a group of nomads with hoarding disorder. I mean, they run around in everybody's rooms because they don't know where, and they have lockers that they collect things in. And so I'd always be in her closet. And at the beginning, I'd get upset, like, these aren't your clothes. Where were your clothes? And she'd be standing there in somebody else's sweater.
Right.
That was one of my favorite parts of the book, honestly. I just giggled the entire time because I could see it. I mean, my mother's not in memory care, but I've been in the memory care wing of, her old assisted living where she used to live. I'd been in there, and I could absolutely see that, them just wandering in and out of each other's rooms, taking stuff.
And finally, I was like, I don't really care. You're wearing clothes.
Yeah, right. It's kind of so, right. Speaking of the sandwich generation, which the three of us here in this conversation, all Gen Xers, all part of the sandwich generation, it's the same thing with the kids. And if I could go back, our kids are, now 20 and 22. And there are certain things when I think back, like, why on earth would I have argued about, maybe our daughter wearing X to school? Like, who the heck cares? She's got clothes on and she's going to be a rock star in her second grade classroom. Like, it doesn't matter. Stuff like that just doesn't matter. I think finally, and I think we've sort of touched on this a little bit. So we said, maybe what would you have done a little bit differently? But if you had one piece of advice that really stands out for you to give to people who might be helping to care for someone with Lewy body dementia, like, what would your best piece of advice be?
Well, I think this probably goes across the board for just caregiving in general. Asking for help and accepting help are two totally different things. So for me, I would have help all around me and not take advantage of it. So I would have, hired an in-home care person. So I asked for that help and then wouldn't utilize them to the degree I should have, just to really save that energy for other things so I could show up better in other scenarios or even memory care. I put her in this wonderful memory care facility, and then I was doing things that they could have done, or I could have taken a break in another way. And so accepting that help and not feeling guilty about it was something I really struggled with. And I can look back in hindsight now and see that had I really truly accepted the help that was all around me, I probably would have showed up a little bit better in some scenarios, whether it be with my mom or maybe my family too.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think it is a struggle for everyone who cares for someone, because you're constantly balancing, I know I got to get all these things done, right? There's just the everyday have-tos that have to get done. And then there's the balancing, but I want to enjoy time. Like, I want to enjoy time with them. I want to go out and do fun things with them. And then, by the way, you might also be working and you might also be taking care of kids, and there's a million things to do. So I appreciate you saying that. And I hope that anyone out there listening to this who is caring for a loved one, and I appreciate you saying that it's not even necessarily just LBD, but caring for anyone, accept the help. Don't feel guilty. I think all of us who find ourselves in situations where we really are carrying a heavy load of helping other people, I think it's very natural that we're also the type of people who carry around a lot of guilt. I think those things go hand in hand. And if you can try to let some of that go, I think that's great advice, Michelle.
All right. So can you tell people where to find your book? The book is titled, Did My Mom Drop Acid?
It really is a great title. I mean, it's just because you can't not giggle a little bit, which I think was exactly what your intention was.
It was, and I did not title this book until the very end. And I was back going through, doing some editing with the publisher. And I looked at that first chapter, and I remember turning to my husband after we had gotten back from her house. It was just the strangest day. She had left me a strange voicemail. And I remember looking at him and going, did she drop acid or eat a pot brownie? I was like, what happened here? So then it just became the perfect did she drop acid? It just became a catchy title, and also it kind of fit.
It's absolutely perfect. It's perfect. So where can folks find it?
On Amazon.
Amazon's the best place. Okay.
Yep, Amazon's the best place.
All right, and we'll put a link in the show notes to where people can buy it. I'll find it. But Michelle Cain, author of Did My Mom Drop Acid? Thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for listening to this episode. If you'd like to get in touch with us, same ways we can always do it. Don't forget, keep an eye on the Facebook page. We're going to do something with this squirrel. He's like a little 4 or 5 inch tall squirrel. I'm sorry.
We don't know yet.
I'm sorry. I may be misgendering the squirrel.
We're trying to figure it out.
But keep an eye on our Facebook page. But if you want to get in touch with us, if you have a question, comment, whatever, you can email us caregivinggenxstyle@gmail.com. You can text us or leave us a voicemail, 804-723-1221. You can follow us on Twitter. The handle is @GenXCaregiving. Also Blue Sky, same thing, @GenXCaregiving. And as I mentioned, Facebook, go into the show notes. There's a link to the Facebook page. That's the best way to get there. We hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.
Good night, everyone.